In this video, we'll do a basic overview of Photoshop, going through some of the tools as well as some of the image adjustment techniques that you can use. So first things first is we need to open up a image, which is quite simple really, pretty much with any sort of graphic software, pretty much any software really. Just go to File, Open, and the good thing about Photoshop is that it does support the vast majority of image formats. If you go to all formats, for instance, you can see it does have a big list of compatible images. So for instance, you can use PNGs, Tigers, JPEG, etc. So open up any image that you want. So for instance, I'm going to work on this brick wall here. And the first things first is we're going to look at the sort of bottom right hand corner. This is the layers tab. Now layers are basically stacks of images, shapes or drawings that you can layer on top of each other. They can interact with below layers or just below layers. They can interact with the ones below it, which we'll go through just a little bit later on. But first things first is, right now it's called background and it's locked, which means we can't really edit this image. So if you just double click the background layer, and we can name it whatever we want. So I'm going to call this wall. It is important to name your layers, because if you are working on an image project which is going to have like tons of layers, if they're named, it makes it easy to navigate. So now it's unlocked, what I can do now is I can start editing this. So the first ones we're going to look at are the image adjustment techniques. These basically allow us to change the hue, which is the color, as well as tonal values, making it lighter, darker, or emphasizing some of the highlights in the image. So brightness and contrast, for instance, the first one. And you can see here 2 sliders for brightness and contrast. And as I change it, so if I move this to the right, you see the image gets brighter, so it updates in real time. Go down, it reduces it, making it darker. And you can put a numerical value in there. Minus means that it's darker, plus numbers means that it's lighter. And with contrast underneath, you can see that we can emphasize or sort of decrease some of the highlights in the image. So for instance, I might decide to do this, for instance, and press OK to keep those changes. The other ones that we have are levels. And again, it's just another way of changing around sort of hue, saturation, and even tonal values as well. So again, we've got another sort of visual representation of the levels, and what we can do is we can either add a numerical value or we can change around these sliders. So there's 3 pointers here which we can use to make alterations to our image, into input level as well. It's not, as you can see, it works with the red, green, and blue color channels, and we can actually influence the specific color channels as well. So I can go to red, for instance, change around some of these layers here, and you can see by me increasing this, it's emphasizing the red a lot more, even making it sort of like really bright. Again, the main thing is subtlety if you're changing images around. So for instance, I'm going to have it just about there, for instance. A bit bright, but I'm just playing around with experimenting with it at the moment. Go to image adjustments again. The third one we're going to look at is curves. Again, very similar. It allows you to change the red, green, and blue color channels. This time giving us a line which we can put dots in, like so. And we can move those dots around ever so slightly to kind of change the way our image looks. Again, change around the sort of hue, highlights, and even some of the colors as well. You've also got black and white, which just desaturates the image. You can play around with the hue and saturation as well, so we can make the image more saturated if need be, or desaturate it, adding some light and dark elements to it, and even changing some slight areas of the hue as well. And again, we can change it to different colors as well. So here at the side are the different tools that you can use. So the first one right at the top is the move tool. Basically, if I ever need to move sort of like a layer or an image in a layer, for instance, this is the one you want to use. Underneath that are the marquee tools or the selection tools. These 3 here basically lets you select certain areas of an image in which you can edit just that specific selection. So for instance, if I just click on this right now, hover over, say, these 3 bricks, and if I quickly go to image adjustments, you can see right now that I'm increasing and decreasing the brightness and contrast, and it's only affecting what's currently selected. It doesn't affect the rest of the image, it only affects what's currently selected. And you can change as well. You'll notice with most of these tools, they have this small little triangle icon at the bottom. This basically means that if you click on it, you have different options. So for instance, rather than going for like a rectangle marquee, I can go for a circle instead, or just like a single column one, for instance. Underneath that is the lasso tool, polygon and lasso tool. So essentially we can just draw on the image to have a selection, or we can use the polygon one, which does it in segments, in lines, like so. And lastly, we have the magic wand and the quick selection. Quick selection is based on a brush, and you can press the brackets to increase and decrease the brush size. You can also do it here as well, size of the brush. And what that basically does is any aspect of the image that's within that brush, it will select it. You can increase and decrease it to change the area of influence, as you can see. You can also hold down Alt to deselect areas as well. The magic wand tool does the exact same thing as well. It's a selection tool, and by increasing and decreasing the tolerance, it will actually influence how much of the area will be selected. So for instance, right now it's at 50. So you see it's kind of selecting sort of smaller areas right now. If I decrease that to say 20, it's selecting the sort of smaller details in the image. Going upwards will have more of like a broad stroke. So go to 80 for instance. Yeah, you can see that it's selecting various different elements of this image. What we can do as well is if you have a certain part of the image selected, go back to the move tool, you can essentially remove that aspect, move it around to different areas, or just to delete it entirely if you wanted. Some of the other tools that we have here as well, you have the patch tools. Basically, you can move certain areas around in a image. So, for instance, I can select, say, this area here, and you can see if I move it around, it basically makes a duplicate of that same image, but you can just move it around, rotate it all the way around to make alterations to the image itself. The heal brush and the spot heal brush do similar sort of things as well, so I would say play around and experiment with what those can do. Underneath we have the brush, and you'll see here at the top, so you have various different presets, so you have like different styles of brushes. And again, just like with the quick selection tool, if you press the brackets, you can increase and decrease the size of the brush. And essentially you can just draw on your image. Again, there's some other options as well. So you've got the brush, pencil, mixer brush. The clone stamp tool is very good. Again, it works using a brush. And essentially what you can do is if you hold on Alt, you can pick a certain area of your image. So for instance, this part here. And I can pretty much clone that particular part of the image into a different part of it, like so. Here we have the eraser tools. I've also had the default eraser to delete things, and you have different versions of it as well. So for instance, you can have, let's say, the background eraser. So you pick that color, for instance, it should just delete that particular image. Oop, the wrong one. The magic erasers are probably the best one to do. Under there is the paint bucket, so we can just paint it. We can just paint a specific color all over. I also got the gradient as well, so if you want like two different colors, that's the best one to use. You have the blur, sharpen, and smudge tools, and like as I say, the blur tool essentially blurs the image a little bit slightly. And the smudge tool basically moves the image around, smudging it slightly, like so. We'll be looking at some of these tools later on, but you also have the text tool as well, so you can type in some text if need be. If I can spell correctly, that is. And you can change the font as well. There's a massive list of fonts that you can use here in Photoshop. Also change the size of the text as well if need be. Under the text tool you have the shape tools. So for instance you got a rectangle tool to make rectangles if need be. Circles, polygons, lines, and custom shapes. Right at the top here you'll see shapes. Scroll over and you'll see that it has a variety of shapes that you can use. I think you can also get some pre-made ones downloaded as well and install it into Photoshop, so you can make, like, say, an arrow for instance. Copyrighted image. So various different shapes that you might find useful when creating, say, logos or labels for instance. And here you have the zoom tool as well, so you can zoom in and out of your object. So what I'll quickly show you now is the layers options. So as you can see, we only have one image right now, which is the wall. Here I have some moss. So what I can do is, if you have a image in another window, if you click on that image, you can click and drag it across. Keep holding down the left mouse button and drop it. And you can see now that we have the moss in this scene here as well. Now at the moment the moss is very, very big, so we need to scale this down, and the best way to do that is by pressing Ctrl T on your keyboard. And see here that it'll have the transform tools. So essentially we can move this around, we can also rotate it, but we can also scale it as well. So for instance, these little boxes in the side here, if you click and drag, we can decrease the size, like so. But we can squash it and make it wider if need be. If you want to keep it uniform, you hold on Shift, click any of these boxes, and it will scale down uniformly so it doesn't really lose its shape, for instance. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger, place it across this image here. So I'm going to make sure to double click that and rename it to moss. Now, at the moment, this moss is basically just an image on top of another image. It doesn't really feel that natural. So what we can do here is we can use some of the layer options here to change how the moss influences the wall, or vice versa. So right at the top here we have, it says normal. Click on this, you have different blend options for the layers. So at the moment we're on normal. If you go to multiply, you can see it kind of seeps into the image below. And if you just press up and down your keyboard, because again we're still in the blend options, you can see how each option changes how the moss interacts with the wall. So you have darken colored here, lighten, screen, color dodge, etc., overlay, soft light, and you can mess around with, you can keep going through different options to see what works and what doesn't work for your image. So for instance, I might decide to go for something, say, like overlay, for instance, because that feels much more natural. Like, yeah, this is moss that's on top of this wall, for instance, rather than just like, say, normal, where it doesn't really feel like it's actually on that wall. It's just an image on top of another image. We also have the opacity and fill options. With the opacity, it's basically transparency, so you can turn this down, and you see at 0, it's completely invisible. 100 is completely visible, so you can kind of change that and influence how it interacts with another object. So that's a quick basic overview of Photoshop. The next couple of videos we'll be talking about some of the blend options, creating simple little buttons, and also the different selection tools and what you can do with those.